Hello and welcome to the recording on the Affordable Care Act for VITA services for West Michigan. This is part of our federal tax law training, and my name is Amanda Grover. I'm here to review the Affordable Care Act, or as some people call it, Obamacare, and the Affordable Care Act, or ACA, is typically what I refer to it as through this training. So today we're going to talk about how the Affordable Care Act has impacted the federal tax return and what you need to know at your tax site as you start utilizing the different tax forms. I do want to preface this by saying that through our program and through VITA services for West Michigan, we're really focusing on the impact specifically on the tax return. So some of this information gets a little convoluted because people start talking about the marketplace and enrollment and enrolling in healthcare. While we have all of that information available as a resource at the tax site, that's not for you as a tax preparer to determine. Your specific role is just to input the information from people's financial records regarding the healthcare coverage and inputting that into the tax software. So to start out, everybody should have healthcare coverage. This became a law in 2014, and what that indicated basically is that if somebody does not have healthcare coverage, then they are penalized, and all of this takes place and is reconciled on the tax return at the end of each year. So people are coming into our tax sites and have various forms. We're going to go through the basics of the Affordable Care Act and how that plays out on the tax return. So I'm going to start by just kind of explaining the different circumstances that people may be in concern to healthcare coverage. A taxpayer either has what's called a minimal essential coverage, exemptions, or marketplace insurance coverage. If they do not have any of that, so if they don't have minimal essential coverage or a mix between these three items, then they have no coverage for either that month, or it may be for a whole year or for a time period, in which case the person is just penalized. The monetary amount is dependent on the person's income, and we'll go through that information towards the end of this presentation. But what I want to start by doing is explain one of these three circumstances if somebody has applied for healthcare coverage. So first we're going to start with minimal essential coverage and what it is. Minimal essential coverage is that there's just some form of healthcare coverage, and it can be for all year or it can be for just a few months. If somebody has healthcare coverage for one day of a month, then that means that they're covered for that whole month. So for example, if somebody has healthcare coverage and it's only until July 5th, then they're covered for all of the months of January, February, March, April, May, June, and all of July as well. So that's kind of how the coverage works from month by month. And healthcare coverage can be in the form of a lot of different pieces. So it could be insurance that somebody bought previous and has as a retiree. It could be Medicaid or Medicare, or employer coverage or COBRA. We see these most commonly at the tax sites. And I do want to just explain that first. Typically what we see at the tax sites is that somebody's had one form of healthcare coverage all year. And a lot of people know what their healthcare coverage is, and it's very, very simple if that's the case. About 80% of the people that we serve at the VITA sites have minimal essential coverage, and they've had it all year. If that's the case, working through these different situations is very, very simple, and it's just a matter of checking a box within the software. But I do want to go through some of the circumstances that may not be that easy so that you're prepared for them. And I want to break it down through this presentation because really if you break it down exactly like I show you through this presentation and then get a few examples under your belt and practice on some of these returns, you'll find that it's not a very intimidating topic at all. So minimal essential coverage, you know that somebody has it if they indicate that to you. The IRS should be responsible for having, has made it so that employers should be sending their employees forms just indicating their healthcare coverage situation. You can also see if you have a W-2 in box 12, it can indicate if there's coverage. But I will say that, like I said, 9 times out of 10, people understand what months they had insurance, or if they had insurance all year and where it was through. So just making sure that you're on the same page communication-wise with the taxpayer is going to be the biggest piece to getting all of this coordinated and making sure you're inputting the information into the software appropriately. So individual health care, that can, even if somebody buys insurance through any sort of private healthcare coverage, that counts as minimal essential coverage as well. There are student plans, so if somebody comes in and they're a college student and they've indicated they have insurance coverage through the college, then that counts as minimal essential coverage. Also, if somebody has bought any insurance through the marketplace, which we will get into further detail on, that counts as minimal essential coverage. And in that case, you can just indicate that the person has health care coverage all 12 months of that year. You can see here, this is what it looks like in the tax software. So you just indicate if somebody's had insurance at any time, and then this is a full list of all of the different insurance coverage that a lot of the people at the VITA sites have. Like I said, I highlighted the most common ones that you'll see. If there is a healthcare coverage in a circumstance that you're not familiar with, then feel free to ask other volunteers, your site coordinator, or our program coordinator, Carl Lewis. So exemptions. There are times where somebody is in between insurance plans, so it might be because they've switched jobs. There's a lot of different situations, but there are times where a person either doesn't have coverage for a few months, or there's also a time where people can apply for insurance and they get what's called an exemption, and that's where the federal government has indicated that their circumstances indicate that they are exempt from having to pay the penalty for not having health care coverage. Typically, if somebody comes into the tax site, they know if they've had an exemption. They've received forms. They've gone through the process of filling out paperwork to apply for this exemption. So there's a few different circumstances where that's a possibility. Like I said, you may have exemptions that are year-round or exemptions that are just for a few months. If there's no paperwork, then that's typically when you have to utilize your 4012 and see if any of the circumstances apply to the client. So these are some of the exemptions for the Affordable Care Act, and where you may be able to use a list of exemption codes. So I'll show you the full list of exemption codes in the next slide, but this is what it looks like to indicate an exemption in the software. So you can see here it's asking the name of the individual because people in the household may have different insurance situations. A lot of the time they're the same. But if there's a marketplace issued certificate, so that happens if somebody applies for marketplace coverage and for whatever reason they may be denied, they may receive an exemption code. So they may receive that for, like I said, either specific months or for a full year, and that will be indicated on the paperwork that the person brings in with them. If the person indicates that they've applied for an exemption and they've lost their paperwork, then you'll definitely want to hold off on filling out this portion of the tax return, because it can equate into some huge penalties for people if they don't indicate the exemption information appropriately. So do know that that is a piece. This is a full list. This is, again, is in your 4012 publication. And these are the various codes you can use in the circumstances. Now, I would recommend reading through these and getting familiar with some of these circumstances. But what you want to do at the tax site is identify what months the person has coverage and what months they don't, and then see if these exemption rules apply, in which case you can apply them to some of the months if there's no coverage. If there's no coverage and none of these apply, then unfortunately they do just have to have the consequences of that penalty for not having coverage. That drop down, the list is a drop down one, so in 2 slides ago I had mentioned that you can select the exemption type, so you can select one of these, so it's not like you have to memorize them or memorize the specific code. You'll just put it into the software like this. So what if somebody does buy insurance through the marketplace? If that's the case, then they will want to go ahead and bring you their 10, what form is that? They'll want to bring you their healthcare coverage form in with them so that you can actually read it. It's called the 1095A. And you'll absolutely need this form in order to do the tax return. So the marketplace was set up by the federal government, and it's basically private companies and their insurance plans that are regulated to adhere to the requirements of the Affordable Care Act. Now, with insurance through the marketplace, people are typically eligible for what's called a premium tax credit. The premium tax credit is in place to help offset the cost of the insurance plan. So what happens is a person they enroll in the marketplace at a specific location, a marketplace enrollment center, and they take a look at the person's estimated income for the upcoming year. Based on the estimate of what that income will be, a premium tax credit will also be calculated, and that premium tax credit is then provided directly to the insurance company, and then the person with the healthcare coverage pays the difference between the credit and that insurance premium. So I know it's a little bit complicated. Sometimes a visual helps. So this is the 1095A form. It will have in this top part the recipient information, so it might be just an individual person or it may be people in a household, in which case you can go down here and look at the household coverage. And if that's the case, then all the people in the home should be selected and should show what sort of coverage that they had in the subsequent columns. Now, this is the big piece that you'll want to know for the tax preparation, and that's where you'll pay attention to this household information. You may see that a few of the months don't have coverage, but for any of the coverage, you're basically taking the information from this 1095A form and putting it into the software, in which case it'll calculate if the person owes money based on the advanced premium tax credit. So to explain this form, it breaks down month by month the insurance, and a lot of the times the insurance is going to be the same the whole way down from month to month. But sometimes it changes a little bit if the person has updated the marketplace to indicate if there's been a loss or gain in income. At any rate, this is in column A, it would be the cost of the insurance. In column B, it'll be the cost of the premium. And in column C, it'll be the amount of that credit. And what you're doing in the software is you're putting in this information so that the software can reconcile the amount that's that the person owes, if they owe anything based on their income and how much they actually ended up making that year. So you can see here, this is a perfect example of what the 1095A form can look like. This first column is the monthly premium amount, so that's how much the client is expected to pay based on the cost of the plan that's listed in column B. And then in column C is that premium tax credit, which is applied to the cost of this plan. So this is what is automatically sent to the insurance company, and this is to provide the difference in what the client should be paying and what they're billed each month. So once you put that coverage in, then it calculates that the client has received too much or not enough of the premium tax credit. Every now and then people will receive a credit, so they'll have they'll have their wages reduced based on not receiving enough of the credit, but more often than not, we've actually seen people receiving way too much of the premium tax credit, and that's because they haven't gone back to the marketplace to have their plan updated. Now, in the software, it'll ask you directly, did the person purchase insurance in the marketplace? And if you mark this box yes, that's when it brings up the previous slide. This is what it looks like specifically in that software. So you'll be able to indicate what months there was insurance and what months there was coverage and not coverage. Again, you can also indicate through the software if there is a mix of an exemption that may apply as well as this coverage. So a person may have a situation where they had no coverage, marketplace coverage, and exemptions. Again, that's very rare, but that's why it's helpful to break everything out month by month. Hopefully you've already gone through the intake and interview training, and you will have known that that has a spot on the worksheet of the intake and interview form where you can go through, and it kind of is a nice way if you're first getting used to doing these sort of tax returns, how to break that out. So what's being calculated on these tax forms? It's basically to see how much of the premium tax credit the person has received, if it's enough, not enough, or if it's just right. And if there wasn't any insurance in the household at all, this is kind of what people are facing for the upcoming year. There's either going to be a penalty of $195 per person for the year in the home, or it's going to be 2.5% of the yearly household income. So the having no insurance is starting to be pretty expensive. I think with it being with it getting increasingly worse, and people getting used to buying insurance in the marketplace and getting used to the Affordable Care Act, that a lot of the people are now aware of insurance and the repercussions of not having insurance. I know the first year it was a big shock to a lot of the clients that came into our tax sites, but I didn't see last year that there were too many people that this kind of caught completely off guard. So people typically know if they haven't had insurance that there's a penalty, and and people know by now that if they have bought marketplace coverage and insurance with the marketplace, that they need to wait for those tax forms to come in before they can file their taxes. So my advice in approaching the Affordable Care Act is take it one step at a time. First, review your resource material so you can kind of get a gauge for some of this terminology. I think this training should be helpful for it, but you'll definitely want to go through some practice problems and read through some of these. Also, work slowly through this. There's no rush, so don't put any pressure on yourself where there isn't, and get any assistance that you need. So know that you can rely on Carl as you're learning this information. We do have classroom time where we can get together with other volunteers, or we sit down as a group and work through some of the practice problems. All of this is in here as a resource to you. So especially as you get through the software and start approaching some of your practice problems, especially if what's on this presentation isn't resonating, or if it's contradictory to what's in your resource material, just let one of us know and we're happy to work through it with you and to answer any questions. So my big thing is to encourage you to do the practice problems and to get used to the forms. So that's all I have for this presentation. If you have any questions, like I said, Carl is a great resource. We want to be here to support you as you work on your certification. So if there's anything we can do, just let us know, and we're happy to help. Thanks so much for watching, and have a great day.